Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going deep on a topic that's super important for anyone who's interested in India, especially those gearing up for the UPSC exams,
All right.
the official languages of India.
Yeah.
You might think it's simple, but trust me,
Oh, yeah.
there are layers here that could easily trip you up on exam day.
Absolutely.
It's a topic that goes
like-
way beyond,
Yeah.
simple definitions and dives into like the heart of India's cultural and political landscape.
Okay, so let's start with the cornerstone, Article 17 of the Indian Constitution.
Okay.
Now, I know our listeners, especially those UPSC aspirants, are familiar with the basics.
Sure.
But what are some of the potential controversies or conflicting interpretations within Article 17 that we should be aware of?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And a smart way to approach this.
Yeah.
While Article 17 lays out the framework for official languages,
Right.
the devil is in the details.
Okay.
For example, the article talks about the official language of the Union,
Right.
which is Hindi.
But it also mandates the use of the international form of numerals, not the Devanagari numerals used in Hindi. This has led to debates about what constitutes the pure form of Hindi
Right.
and its implications for national identity.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
International form of numerals.
Yeah.
You've totally lost me there.
Oh, okay.
What does that even mean?
Good catch. It's easy to gloss over these terms.
Yeah.
Essentially, it means we use the Arabic numerals 1, 2, 3 that are common worldwide
Okay.
instead of the Devanagari equivalents.
Gotcha.
It might seem like a minor detail,
Right.
but it highlights the tension between promoting Hindi and acknowledging the practical need for a globally understood system.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to balance tradition and practicality right from the start.
Right.
But that brings up another point.
Sure.
You mentioned Hindi is the official language of the Union,
Yeah.
but English is still used extensively. Why is that?
Well,
Why not just switch to Hindi entirely?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that simplify things?
but India's story is rarely about simplicity.
Right.
Remember, the 8th schedule of the Constitution recognizes 22 languages.
Yeah.
Plus, there are countless others spoken across the country.
Of course.
Shifting entirely to Hindi would alienate a huge portion of the population.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
It's about that whole unity and diversity thing.
Exactly.
But does this dual language system create any challenges or inefficiencies?
Sure.
I mean, wouldn't it be easier for everyone to operate in just one language?
That's a question that comes up a lot.
Yeah.
And it's something UPSC aspirants should definitely consider.
Right.
On the one hand, using both Hindi and English can lead to duplication of effort and sometimes confusion,
Yeah.
especially in legal and administrative contexts.
Right.
But on the other hand, it ensures accessibility for a wider range of citizens.
That's true.
And reflects the multilingual reality of India.
It's like they're trying to find a middle ground,
Yeah.
which makes sense given the complexity of the situation. But all this talk about the union level is making me wonder.
Sure.
What about the states?
Yeah.
Do they get a say in which languages they use officially?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
And this is where a deep understanding can give UPSC candidates an edge.
Okay.
The Constitution actually gives each state the power to choose its own official language or languages.
Wow.
They can opt for one or more languages used within the state or stick with Hindi.
So we could have one state using, say, Tamil as its official language, another using Bengali,
Yeah.
and yet another using both Hindi and Marathi.
Exactly.
But,
It's a fascinating tapestry reflecting the immense linguistic diversity of India.
Yeah.
And to make things even more intriguing,
Okay.
states can also choose to use Hindi for communication with each other instead of relying on English.
Okay.
Some states like Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh have already done this.
Wow, that's a lot of linguistic juggling. But it sounds like the Constitution, at least, tries to give states some autonomy in managing their language affairs. But tell me what happens if a state doesn't specify an official language.
Yeah.
Is there a default setting?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
and one that could easily pop up on the UPSC exam.
For sure.
Until a state legislature makes a choice,
Uh-huh.
English continues to be the official language for that state.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So English sort of acts as the safety net in the linguistic landscape of India.
I like that.
But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the courts.
Okay.
I was a bit confused about which language they use. Is it Hindi English or a mix of both?
The language of the law.
Yeah.
This is another area ripe for UPSC-style analysis.
Okay.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court and the High Courts currently use English for all their proceedings.
Okay.
This includes judgments, orders, and all official documents.
Okay, so even if a state has adopted Hindi as its official language, its high court still functions in English.
That's right.
Wow.
And it goes even further than that.
Okay.
The Official Languages Act of 1963, which we'll get into more detail later,
Right.
mandates that all bills, acts, ordinances, and other legal documents at the union level also need to be in English.
Wow, so English really holds a significant position in the legal sphere, even after all these years since independence.
It does.
But that raises a crucial question.
Okay.
What about states that primarily use Hindi?
Sure.
Do they have to translate all their laws and judgments into English as well?
Yes, they do.
Really?
The Official Languages Act is very clear on that point.
Wow.
It requires an authorized English translation for all Hindi documents,
Okay.
ensuring accessibility across the country.
Gotcha.
Some states like Uttar Pradesh and Rajasthan have started using Hindi for judgments,
Okay.
but they still have to provide that English translation for the official record.
It seems like ensuring everyone can understand the law, regardless of their language, is a top priority. But what about those who speak languages that aren't on that list of 22 the 8th schedule, right?
Yeah.
Does the Constitution offer them any protection or recognition?
That's an important question.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of how India seeks to protect linguistic minorities.
Okay.
Even if your language isn't officially recognized, you still have the fundamental right to submit a representation for grievance redressal to any officer or authority in any language used in India.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
It seems like they've really tried to cover all the bases when it comes to language rights. But I'm curious.
Yeah.
We keep bumping into this 8th schedule in our sources.
Right.
It seems like a big deal.
It is.
But what exactly is it?
Yeah.
Is it like a ranking system for languages?
Not exactly a ranking system.
Okay.
But more like a prestigious club with certain benefits and implications.
Yeah.
We'll dive into that in part 2.
Okay.
Where we unpack the significance of the 8th schedule.
Sounds good.
And its role in shaping India's language policies.
Perfect, because this deep dive is just getting started.
It is.
And I can already tell there's so much more to uncover.
Oh, yeah.
Stay tuned, folks, because in part 2, we'll explore the 8th schedule, its controversies, and its impact on language policy in India.
Looking forward to it. You're right. The 8th schedule is key to understanding how language functions in India. Think of it as a recognition by the Constitution that certain languages are important to the fabric of the nation.
Okay, so it's not a Billboard Top 100, but more like a cultural Hall of Famer. What languages are we talking about here? Give us the rundown.
Well, right now there are 22 languages on the list. Some are spoken by millions, like Hindi, Bengali, Marathi, Telugu, Tamil, Gujarati, and Kannada. But the list also includes languages with smaller speaker bases, like Odia, Punjabi, Assamese, Kashmiri, and Malayalam.
22 languages. That's a lot to keep track of. What are the implications for a language being on this list? Does it come with perks?
It definitely does. Inclusion in the 8th schedule comes with a voice at the national level. Members of these language groups get representation in the Official Languages Commission, which advises the government on, you guessed it, language policy.
So it's not just about prestige. It's about having a seat at the table when decisions are being made.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful stuff.
Exactly. And remember, we discussed how Hindi can be enriched by drawing on the forms, styles, and expressions of other languages. The 8th schedule plays a crucial role in that process. It's about creating a national language that reflects the richness and diversity of all its parts.
Now it's all starting to click, but can languages be added to this exclusive list, or is it set in stone?
It's not static. The Constitution allows for amendments, and over the years, several languages have been added to the 8th schedule.
Ah, so it's a living document evolving with the times. Give me some examples of languages that have been added.
Well, back in 1967, Sindhi was added to the list. Then, in 1992, Konkani, Manipuri, and Nepali were included. And more recently, in 2003, Bodo, Dogri, Maithili, and Santhali joined the ranks.
Wow, the list has really grown over time. So there's a process for adding languages. But what about removing them? Has that ever happened?
Removing a language from the 8th schedule is a highly sensitive issue, and to my knowledge, it has never happened. The focus has always been on inclusion and recognizing the diversity of languages in India. After all, language is a fundamental part of cultural identity.
This is where it gets really interesting, especially for our UPSC listeners, because if language is tied to identity, it also becomes tied to politics. I imagine there's a lot of debate and activism around which languages make it onto the 8th schedule.
You're absolutely right. There are many groups advocating for the inclusion of their languages in the 8th schedule. They argue that it's a matter of cultural preservation, linguistic rights and representation for their communities.
And on the flip side, are there arguments against expanding the list? Wouldn't recognizing more languages be a good thing?
There are concerns, of course. Some people worry that adding more languages could dilute the special status and resources associated with being on the list. Others argue that it could create administrative complexities and even exacerbate linguistic tensions.
So it's a balancing act, trying to recognize and preserve languages while also considering the practical implications. It sounds like a potential minefield for a UPSC exam question. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about how these language policies actually get implemented. We keep hearing about the Official Language Act of 1963. What's its role in all of this?
Think of the Official Languages Act as the instruction manual for putting the Constitution's language provisions into practice. It clarifies the use of Hindi for official purposes, outlines the process for states to choose their official languages, and lays out procedures for things like translating documents.
So it's like the nuts and bolts of how all these language policies actually work on the ground. But we touched on this earlier. Yeah. The Act also requires English translations of legal documents, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It mandates that all central government laws, bills, and ordinances must have an authorized English translation. This ensures that people from all linguistic backgrounds can understand and engage with the law.
That makes sense. It's about ensuring accessibility and transparency in a country as diverse as India. But I'm wondering if the Constitution sets the stage and the Official Languages Act provides the blueprint. Who's making sure everything runs smoothly, who's keeping an eye on things.
That's where the Committee of Parliament on Official Language comes in. They're like the watchdogs of language policy in India.
Watchdogs, I like that. So they bark if someone's not following the rules.
Exactly. Their job is to ensure the government is effectively implementing the Official Language Act. They review the progress of Hindi's use in official settings, investigate complaints, and make recommendations to the president based on their findings.
So they're not just sitting around, they're actively involved in shaping language policy. But who are these watchdogs? Are they language experts?
The committee is made up of 30 members of parliament, 20 from the Lok Sabha and 10 from the Rajya Sabha. They're elected by their respective houses, so they represent the diverse voices within parliament.
So they're not necessarily linguists, but they are representatives of the people, which makes sense given the political nature of language in India. But we haven't talked much about one particular group of languages, the classical languages. We briefly touched on them earlier. But what does it actually mean for a language to be classified as classical in India?
It's like being inducted into a linguistic hall of fame. It's a recognition of the language's historical significance, its rich literary tradition, and its impact on other languages. Currently, there are 6 languages with this prestigious designation: Tamil, Sanskrit, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, and Odia.
6 languages out of so many. That's pretty exclusive.
Yeah.
What are the criteria for earning this classical title?
It's not just about being old. There are specific requirements. The language must have a recorded history of at least 1,500 to 2,000 years. It needs a substantial body of ancient literature that's considered valuable heritage, and it must have a literary tradition that's original and not borrowed from another language.
Sounds like a tough test to pass.
Yeah.
But what's in it for the languages that make the cut? What are the benefits of being a classical language?
Being classified as classical comes with tangible benefits. It opens up opportunities for financial assistance, to set up centers of excellence for studying the language. Scholars specializing in the language can receive prestigious awards, and there's even a provision for requesting the University Grants Commission to create dedicated professor positions at universities. It's all about promoting research scholarship and preservation.
Okay, so it's not just an honorary title. It comes with real support for the language and its scholars.
Yeah.
This all makes me think that the concept of classical languages is a relatively new thing in India.
You're right on the mark. The first language, Tamil, was designated as classical in 2004, so the entire process is still evolving. And that brings us to a fascinating debate. Should more languages be added to the classical category?
Ooh, now that's a cliffhanger. We'll have to dive into that debate and explore the potential contenders in Part 3. Stay tuned, folks, because this deep dive is far from over.
Looking forward to unpacking it all.
Okay, we're back and ready to tackle that cliffhanger from Part 2.
Right.
You mentioned a debate about adding more languages to the classical category.
Yeah.
What's fueling this discussion?
Well, what's interesting here is that the concept of classical languages in India is relatively recent. The first language, Tamil, received the designation in 2004.
Right.
So the whole process is still evolving, and people are naturally asking, what about our language?
So which languages are being considered? Who are the hopefuls vying for a spot in this exclusive club?
Well, there are a number of strong contenders, each with its own compelling case for inclusion. Some of the most prominent names being put forward are Pali, Prakrit, and Marathi.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What makes these languages stand out as potential candidates?
Yeah.
What's their claim to fame?
Each of these languages has a deep historical and cultural significance, coupled with a rich literary tradition.
Okay.
Take Pali, for example.
Yeah.
It's the language of the Buddhist scriptures,
Right.
which means it holds immense religious and historical importance for millions of people across the world.
That's a pretty strong argument right there. What about Prakrit?
Yeah.
What's its story?
Prakrit is fascinating because it's not just one language, but a group of ancient Indo-Aryan languages.
Mm-hmm.
They played a significant role in literature, drama, and even inscriptions, giving us a window into India's past.
So Prakrit is like a linguistic time capsule.
Right.
And what about Marathi?
Yeah.
What puts it in the running for classical status?
Marathi has a long and vibrant literary tradition dating back to the 11th century. It's been a powerful force in shaping the cultural identity of the Maharashtra region and has produced some of India's most renowned literary figures.
Wow. So we have these strong contenders, each with a compelling case. What are the main arguments for granting them classical status? Why are people pushing for this recognition?
The arguments often center on recognizing their historical contributions, protecting their literary heritage, and promoting research and scholarship.
Right.
Advocates argue that classical status would not only honor these languages,
Yeah.
but also ensure their continued vitality for generations to come.
It makes sense. It's about preserving a part of India's cultural heritage. But I imagine there are also arguments against expanding the list.
Sure.
It can't all be smooth sailing, right?
Of course, there are always different perspectives.
Yeah.
Some people argue that adding more languages could dilute the prestige associated with the classical designation.
Right.
They worry that it might become less meaningful if the criteria are perceived as too lenient.
That's a valid point. It's like winning an Olympic medal. It means more when it's truly exceptional. Are there any other concerns about expanding the list?
Another concern is the financial implication.
Okay.
Remember, classical languages receive government funding for research development and the establishment of centers of excellence.
Right.
Expanding the list would require additional resources, which might be a challenge in a country with competing priorities.
So it's a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
Where do you see this debate heading? What's your prediction for the future of the classical category?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's ultimately a political decision, and there are many factors at play.
Yeah.
But the fact that these discussions are happening is significant in itself. It shows a growing awareness of India's linguistic diversity and a desire to preserve its rich heritage.
I couldn't agree more. This whole deep dive has been an incredible learning experience.
You too.
It's amazing how much depth there is to a topic that might seem straightforward at first glance.
Yeah.
It's a testament to India's complex and fascinating relationship with language.
Absolutely.
And for those listening who are preparing for the UPSC exams, this topic is a goldmine.
For sure.
Remember, it's not just about memorizing facts and figures.
Right.
It's about understanding the nuances, the controversies, and the historical forces that have shaped India's language policies.
Right.
And for those of you who aren't prepping for exams, hopefully this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the incredible linguistic tapestry of India.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that language is more than just a means of communication. It's a reflection of culture, history, and identity.
Absolutely. And as India continues to evolve on the global stage, its approach to language will undoubtedly continue to evolve as well.
Right.
Who knows, maybe in a few years we'll be having the same conversation with an even longer list of classical languages.
That's a fascinating thought. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the future of language in India. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.